All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Shane Moore at Gran Moraine. It's July 21st, 2020. Shane, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Rich.
First question, most important question for our purposes here today is why wine?
Why wine? I mean, it's such a good question, and it's something we think about all the time. I mean, you do need to justify your existence to some extent, I think. And wine is one of those things that I think until you get to know it, it could seem frivolous. So it's a question I've thought a lot about. And, you know, I think one of my favorite answers about wine and why wine is this idea that it's an idea that I think is really silly and makes me really happy all the time. And it's called space wine. And one night we came up with this when we were drinking. But the idea is like civilization, culture, everything that we know has essentially been built upon the foundation of wine. And another winemaker and I thought, you know, it's like, man, if we're going to Mars, like, we need wine. Like, and honestly, it's actually happened. I don't know if you've read any articles about it, but the people have been sending wine to space now for élevage and stuff like that. So it's like, this is cool. So that's why. I mean, yes, it's frivolous, but it brings us together. It brings us closer to the earth. Now I think it's kind of come full circle. Wine, in the beginning of civilization, actually created civilization. It brought us together. It created more of an agrarian culture. Whereas now it's almost that society's come to a way that we use it to bring us back to kind of the roots of civilization in that way too, in agriculture and how we sort of relate with the earth. So, and it's delicious. So, I think that's a lot of it.
An added bonus.
Yeah. It's important, you know. I really do think it's important. So whenever I first got into this, I was probably your age, Lily. I was just turned 20 when I started working in wine, and you know, I was studying environmental science at the time. I wanted to do water quality, and I had a lot of reservations about how frivolous wine is and how I didn't feel like I was going to change the world doing it. And I don't think I am changing the world really that significantly. But I think after you really look into it and feel and get amongst it, you realize how important it is. So, and I think we're realizing it more and more now that we're stuck at home all the time. I know I have.
Gotta have wine when you're stuck at home.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you're about to 20. Tell me about kind of your studies, and you got into environmental science for one reason. Tell me about the kind of pivot, and once you got into wine, kind of take me on the path through getting into the industry. Yeah,
I had kind of an interesting one because I wasn't necessarily really interested in wine at all. Even when I started working in wine, like I said, I was about 20 and I was studying to do environmental chemistry, environmental science. I was really interested in chemistry, particularly water chemistry. And my professor knew a guy who owned a winery. His name was Bob Harris. The winery was Coeur d'Alene Cellars. It was just starting up. And he introduced me to the owner, kind of as like an internship, kind of to do their lab work and their chemistry. I kind of needed some extra money, but then, you know, I fell in love with it. And I grew up on a farm, so like physical labor was always something that I enjoyed. So the cellar was really fun. I could work in the cellar, get dirty, you know, taste delicious things, and at the same time do science. And I found that really compelling. You know, I'd always been kind of into cooking and food, and we were, you know, my mom was a big gardener. We had a cattle ranch. We provided most of our own food through our farm, so that was part of it too. My dad did make really horrible wine growing up, And then he coached me on doing it in high school, which was probably irresponsible of him. But, it wasn't good. It was like some cherry wine. Honestly, I'd like to try it again. I'd like to try to make some lambics or something like that now that I know what I'm doing. But yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. I fell into it. I wasn't necessarily looking to work in wine whenever I started working in wine. My first day at a winery at work was the first time I'd ever seen a barrel of wine. So, yeah. That was in 2004. So,
tell me about. You mentioned getting hooked, and we hear that a lot from people. You see wine for the first time, you see production for the first time, and you get hooked. Tell me what it was for you that appealed to you and made you want to do this, made you want to do wine regularly.
Yeah, I think it was harvest. A lot of it was harvest, like how much fun harvest was, how hard a work it was, but at the end of the day you could drink beer and clean up, and it was the camaraderie of harvest. It was the winemaker I was working with. He was really good at kind of pushing my boundaries, and really good at making sure that I was learning about wine and about tasting. From the start, everything. It was a small winery. We were only doing 65 tons a year, so I think we had time. He had time to do it. So, he would make sure I was tasting every fermenter, and then he would never tell me what I was tasting. He'd ask me, what does this taste like? And then he'd say, does it remind you of, like if I'd say apple, he'd be like, but what kind of apple? Mm-hmm. Is it Granny Smith? You got to dig deeper than that. So that was really fun. I found it was just enthralling, and I think doing that, I had a little bit of, I think Warren the winemaker saw that I had a little bit of an aptitude for it and some talent, and he really pushed me. So that was great. And when you're 20 years old, you don't really know what you want to do, so that was kind of fun too. It's like, oh, well, this seems like it's a great opportunity. I like doing it. So yeah, I haven't ever had a real job since.
What was the work like? What were you doing?
In 2004, Bob, the owner, and his wife Kimber were making wine basically in a garage in their backyard. But Bob was a trained architect, and they got some funding, and they were building a winery. So in 2004, my first harvest, we were literally, I think it was July and August, getting that winery ready for harvest. So I set up the lab. It was funny, it's pretty wild to think that my first harvest was actually first harvest in a winery and actually setting up a winery. I had no idea what I was doing, but set up that lab just based on, basically chem labs at university. So it was way overkill. It was blown out, run a TA 3 times before it's a real TA. Now we just do bucket chemistry. You get a little less particular. So I remember setting up the winery, and then it was, a lot of grunt work, just that sort of stuff, this digging tanks and cleaning distemmers, loading the press at 2 in the morning, things like that. I did get to, it was really fun. I think an opportunity I had there that I think even a lot of young winemakers don't get still after many vintages is we were trucking all of our fruit from Horse Heaven Hills, eastern Washington mostly, over to Coeur d'Alene, which isn't really unheard of in Washington. A lot of people truck their fruit everywhere. It was about a 4 to 5 hour drive from the vineyards to the winery. So the winemaker couldn't be out in the vineyards all the time. It was an entire day. So we set it up to where I would go to the vineyards 1 day a week, and he would go to the vineyards 1 day a week whenever it was getting close to harvest, and pull samples and taste. So I got to start right away tasting fruit, learning what that's about, helping call picks, which that was invaluable. I think not very many people get to do that, even, like I said, after their 10th harvest. So I've always been a little bit overconfident and maybe just ignorant, because I had no idea how big the decisions were that we were making. So I think that helped.
No pressure.
Yeah, I didn't know. So, yeah.
You mentioned feel like you had a pretty good aptitude and talent for it from the start. Did you feel like you had a pretty good palate? Did you feel like those decisions you were making, did they turn out to be pretty solid decisions?
I've had a few of those wines recently, and they're good wines. I don't know. I mean, looking back, I don't know. I think we were always picking too late back then. Early 2000s seemed like we were really pushing ripeness as far as we could go. But, I think the aptitude, I think a lot of it comes from cooking. I think if you're really into flavors and cooking, you could probably taste wine pretty well. It's just knowing when you taste a dish if it needs more salt or not. Winemaking's a little bit like that. Mm-hmm. So, I think that was it. I think almost anyone can learn it as long as you've got a sense of smell and taste that's average. Mm-hmm.
So what happens next? What happens after you're working in Coeur d'Alene?
I was going to North Idaho College, which is a community college. I think it still is, right on Coeur d'Alene Lake, which is some of the best. I spent 3 years at community college, which was great. Did okay, but spent 3 years there. I just couldn't get over how great Coeur d'Alene was as a town. I loved it. So then, after community college, I didn't know, I got an associate's of science, and thought, well, I'll go study somewhere else, but I don't really know where I want to yet. So took a year off of school, worked full-time at Coeur d'Alene Cellars for a bit, and then I thought, well, in the spring I'll go to New Zealand and work harvest. This was 2006 at that time. Back then, though, it turned out, well, the New Zealand dollar was really, really bad. It was maybe like 60 cents on the US, which if you're a tourist is great, but if you're going to try to make New Zealand money, I was going to be making the equivalent to like $6.50 an hour. and visas were not easy to get back then either. I would have had to work under the table and stuff. So instead of working in New Zealand and working a harvest, I just went and backpacked. Spent 3 months down there backpacking, going to wineries. I was 21 by the time, but still hadn't been to a lot of wineries and a lot of tasting room experiences. So spent a lot of time in tasting rooms, just a lot of time kind of traveling and then kind of planning what I wanted to do next. So did that. That was fun. That was really, really fun, actually. Some of the best hikes of my life, some of the best backpacking of my life, and some great hitchhiking too. Some great stories from hitchhiking, and you meet the weirdest people. So then after that, I came home summer, like June-ish of 2006, and set it up to went to WSU, to Enology Viticulture in Washington State University in Pullman. Looked at a lot of other programs at the time. There wasn't as many as there are now, of course. Looked at Davis specifically, but I think they required me to take like another calculus course, and I couldn't be bothered to do that. I really couldn't. That was the deciding factor of not going to Davis. And then University of Adelaide was quite a bit more expensive, so I decided I didn't want to do that either. WSU worked out. I didn't have to take that extra calculus course, and it was a great program. So
they still let you make wine without calculus?
I know. Wild, huh? I don't know how I manage. Hated calculus. So went to WSU. Fall of 2006 was when I started there, but I needed a job. I just spent 3 months traveling. I was broke, man. I was super broke. And so I found an apartment that was cheap and a roommate that I actually grew up with. and there was a winery in Pullman called Mary Cellars. That's the only winery at the time, and I knocked on their door, and Patrick, the owner, was there, and I was like, "Hey, man, I used to work at Coeur d'Alene Cellars. I'm coming to WSU. I need a job. You looking for anyone for harvest?" And he's like, "Yep, yep." And so I started working like the next week, and I worked there for 2 years. So that was great. So I got to work in a winery. I wasn't full time because I was pretty busy with school. But it was basically Patrick and myself, and then he had his fiance at the time, Kaylani, was kind of running sales in the tasting room. And so again, I got another couple years in of some pretty, well, he was working with incredible vineyards, another really small winery, like 60 tons, and got to just kind of, set my own hours and run production for him. It was a great experience. Patrick is a great dude. We still stay in contact all the time. Great winemaker, making great wines too. So that was pretty incredible, to get that. There was a lot of other enology viticulture students. I don't know why no one else had already knocked on his door, but it worked out pretty well. So yeah, I was there for harvest of 6 and 7. And then graduated from Washington State University, enology viticulture, 2008. It was kind of the first real class. I think we had 8 of us graduate. And yeah, a lot of the students are doing great things now. One of my really good friends, Leah, she's the winemaker at the red winemaker at Chateau Saint Michel now. Wow. A couple of the people own their own brands. Chris over at Soder, he was in my class. He's the winemaker there now. So like, yeah, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. Out of the 8 of us, I mean, most of us all stay in contact, and it was a good program, and it's definitely grown a lot since then and gotten better, I'm sure. So.
You were working in the kind of the real world already, and had already worked in the real world and before going and getting the education. Tell me about the differences between what you were learning in classes and what you were seeing and doing in real life. Like what did you learn, and what did you kind of learn that you already had surpassed in some way?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Because yeah, I think you learn in college a lot of stuff about winemaking, but it's the kind of theory, it's not the hands-on stuff. Most of the professors, I remember I took a class from Dr. Edwards, Charlie Edwards, who, that guy is incredible in the field. And, just talking to him about like, what was it? I remember talking to him about making Viognier, and I'd made Viognier for like 4 years at the point, and like, it was something about, like, yeah, Viognier is really bitter. And he's like, Viognier is really bitter? I'm like, yeah, it's like super bitter. The skins are ridiculously bitter. There's things like that, it was a really fun sort of give and take with some of the professors, because I don't know if they'd had anyone that had worked, four real full years in wineries at that point. And that was actually something that I kind of took into account whenever I finished university. And so I really focused on the viticulture side, and we had great viticulture and horticulture professors at WSU, because I kind of figured it's like, well, I've been in wine for 4 years already, but almost exclusively in the wineries, so I should learn as much as I possibly can about viticulture. And so that was kind of my main focus when I was going to school, was learning as much as I could about growing grapes. And that worked out pretty well, I think. I think that was a good decision. I grew up on a farm, so I love that stuff anyway. And it's just, there's the book Sunlight to Wine, and it totally is just that. It's just like, just harvesting the sun. You just, most agriculture is the same. It's like, how do you get the sun to give you as much as you possibly can at the highest quality? So you learn that, and you're off to the races.
I'm curious if at this point you've worked in the wineries, you've taken your courses, you have some viticulture knowledge as well. Has you started sort of developing philosophies for what you wanted to do, what kind of wines you wanted to make, how you wanted to grow grapes, how you wanted to make wine? Had that started to kind of, have you started to think about that yet?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. Like, you know, still in 2008, by the time I graduated, I was, how old was I in 2008? Like 24. So I was a bit of an older student, but like, I mean, honestly, I didn't know that much still. So, you know, I had never made Pinot Noir at the time. I'd always made warmer climate fruit. So my eyes hadn't really even been open to Pinot Noir. I'd tasted Oregon and Burgundy and done these big tastings throughout the years, but making Pinot Noir had escaped me. And that wasn't even a consideration at that point yet. You know, I think wine sometimes, in my experience, has been, it's like a lot of things. Like when you get into it, maybe you're gonna get it. Like it's kind of like music, and like whenever you're first into pop music, right? Like when you're a kid and you're into top 40, that stuff's really easy to listen to, and I think maybe wine's a little bit like that. Like you're kind of into these fruity wines that are kind of just easy to drink, kind of simple. Some people never really go past that. Some people listen to top 40 their whole life. And, you know, then when I was in high school, got really into like rock and blues, and then even into like some harder rock and metal. And I think wine is kind of like that too. Like you go, oh, well, now I'm past these simple wines. I want the biggest wines possible. I want to drink the biggest cabs, and I want to, you know, just blow out my palate every single day. And then, you know, after a while, it's like, well, that's kind of gotten old, at least did for me. And then you kind of get into this sort of like, for me, it was like Pinot Noir is more like maybe like jazz or classical or something like that, and a lot of the European wines are like that too, I guess, not just Pinot Noir. But you get into this sort of place where you're into more subtlety and maybe something that's not just yelling at you, a little bit more sophistication, or like with jazz, that syncopation, like there's those little offbeats that can surprise you, and I think maybe the more subtle wines can do that as well. So I guess when I graduated college, I was still into metal, you know. I listened to a lot of reggae at that point too, which is pretty simple music, I guess. So
it's one of the better wine music analogies we've ever heard, I have to say. That's pretty excellent.
So, you know, and then graduated, and you think, well, I need a job. What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? And this was 2008, but this was before the financial crisis, and things were looking pretty rosy. And I was like, the sky's the limit. I kind of was toying with the idea of getting a PhD. I was working for a genomics lab, Amit Dhingra. I was working in his lab a little bit too, which was really fun. We were doing some really fun, sequencing was just getting like easy then, DNA sequencing. He was working on the apple genome. We were doing some fun stuff, finding certain genes in Vitis vinifera. So I was kind of toying with, oh, should I go into research? And I said, no, I can't do that. I can't go into research. So did some job interviews, and kind of was like, from me talking about my, music analogies, I am a musician. I've always been really into music my whole life. And I love Austin. Austin, Texas is like, man, I love Austin, Texas. So there's a wine region south of Austin, the Austin foothills. Went down there and interviewed for a job, and got a job offer down there outside of New Braunfels. And at the same time, I was like really wanting to move to Canada because I'm really into skiing as well. This is the things that go through a 24-year-old's mind. So I went up to Canada and interviewed at some wineries and got a job offer at Burrowing Owl Winery up in Canada. And I was like, man, I can move to Canada or I move to Texas. And kind of the deciding factor, I guess, for me was that Canada, I could drive 6 hours and be home, and I did grow up on a farm, and my family are still on that farm. That's important to me to see that every once in a while. The other thing is, my dad has still never been in an airplane. Like, they don't travel. So if I moved to Texas, they weren't going to ever come see me. So moved to Canada. Got a job at a winery up in Canada called Burrowing Owl, making great wines. I was doing their... well, I was kind of like being like a vit tech and kind of like a cellar master, I guess, the equivalent of which. That was fun. That was a trip. I mean, you know, your vineyard crews in Canada are mainly Quebecois and people of Indian descent, not Native Americans, but from India. A lot of Indian crews up there. And it was kind of fun to work with both of them. The Quebecois were mostly young, kind of just backpackers, travelers. I fit in with them pretty well. And then the Indian group a lot of them were like pretty recent immigrants. And a lot of them didn't, well, neither groups, it was funny, neither groups, it wasn't funny, it was just the fact of the matter, neither group really spoke English. I had a little bit of background in French, so I mostly worked with the Quebecois because I could actually communicate with them. So worked with some Quebecois crews, and that was a trip. That was fun. That was really fun. I loved it. It's great vineyards up there too. It's hot up there if you've never been, you know. I remember one July day it being 46 degrees Celsius and outside working shoot thinning with some Quebecois. That was tough, you know. 46 is hot. It's hot. Yeah. So, yeah, that was good experience though. So I was up there for about a year. I was on the NAFTA visa, which is still open. You can still get a NAFTA visa and go up there. Yeah, I after about 9 months though, the Okanagan was kind of hard for me at that point. It was, it's quiet, it's very expensive. It's like, you know, it's the warmest place in Canada, so a lot of people have summer homes there and stuff. And skiing was great actually there too though. It just ended up being a little bit harder than I anticipated it being, so I didn't stay as long as I thought I would. And then we had an Australian guy named Tom Stransky, was a harvest intern with us, and him and I hit it off, and he was a great dude. And after about American Thanksgiving, I was like, I think I need to go work another harvest somewhere. And Stransky put me in contact with some people in Western Australia and Margaret River. And it was kind of that same thing. Like, he's like, call this guy named Benoit, Ben Rector. He's like, he'll set you up. And I called Ben Rector, and it was Triple Crown Day. And Ben had been drinking a lot, I think. I could tell on the phone. And I was like, Ben, you know, I'm mates of Tomo, and he said to call you for harvest. And he goes, oh, you're mates of Tomo? Great. I'll see you in a month and a half. So I ended up in Margaret River not too shortly after there. That was February of 2009. I ended up down there at a smallish winery, definitely small at the time, called Deepwoods Estate. Living on site, it was incredible. That was incredible. So, yeah, I could keep going if you want to tell me about Deepwoods. I ended up, I love that place. Great wines. I mean, they won the James Halliday Trophy several times in the last few years. Their Chardonnays are incredible. I think that's where I really got into like making Chardonnay, and that's where I got into this idea of like earlier picking. You know, like we're making cabs and picking them at 12 and a half, 13 Beaumay, whereas in America and Washington, in the cabs I was making, even up in Canada, we were picking at 25, 26 bricks, you know, which is 14 Beaumay, 15 Beaumay. And, you know, and they were making these great wines that were just like being picked almost a month earlier than probably we would have been picking, particularly the whites. So I learned a lot about that. That kind of really informed a lot of what I even still do today. And then just learned a lot about having fun and making wine down there. I mean, Australians have a lot of fun making wine, I think. So I really fit in well down there. It was just great. I still consider Margaret River my second home. If it wasn't so far from home, I think Perth and Margaret River is probably about the farthest you can get from Portland, Oregon, in terms of a commercial flight. You can't really go farther than that. I loved it there. I loved it there. I mean, just made the best friends of my life. So that was 2009. Did that harvest, kind of worked night shift. It was a small crew. Ben, actually, the winemaker, there were two winemakers, Ben and Travis. Ben got sick, and like bad sick during harvest. So it ended up being this French guy named Julian and I just holding down the fort on night shift, and that was intense too. So we did a good enough job. They invited me back. So that fall, I went and worked harvest in Sonoma County at a custom crush facility called what is that custom crush facility called? Vinify. That was fun. Worked with a lot of great winemakers there. That was the first time I really started working with Pinot. Greg Bjornstad stands out as a great Pinot winemaker down there. He's a legend. You know, one of the, I think, founding people of Flowers, I believe. Worked with him, worked with Sojourn, Russell Bevan, who was making some incredible cabs. They were all making wine at this facility, so got to make a lot of great contacts. Got to really get to know a lot of great people in Sonoma County. Learned a lot about Pinot Noir winemaking. So I think that's where I kind of got the bug for Pinot Noir winemaking, was there. That was fun. That was a fun harvest too. Met a lot of great people. Met my now wife at that harvest as well. She was working at Mary Edwards in production. We didn't start dating while I was there. We didn't start dating until I went back to Margaret River, and she was back there in 2010. So like 6 months later. I mean, I guess the other fun thing about that harvest is by that point, I'd been working in wine for about 5 years, mostly talking about wine, just living wine for 5 years straight, essentially. Everyone I lived with worked in wine. That was all. And I was like, I can't take this anymore. I gotta get out of this a little bit. So I started looking for a place to live on Craigslist. And I was like, anyone that doesn't make wine. And I saw this ad for this place, and it's like, I'm just gonna butcher the ad. It was a hilarious ad. It was like, do you like loud music and partying? And I was like, yeah. It's like, come live at the Metal Mansion. And it was this, so I ended up living with this band called Trial by Combat in this old house called the Metal Mansion. And it was great. It was so nice to like not live with wine people for a bit. And yeah, I guess I was still kind of into metal then. That was kind of fun. That was wild. So I lived at the Metal Mansion. Made wine. Yeah,
this is incredible.
Stuff.
You haven't gotten to Oregon yet. This is incredible.
Yeah, long story. Then went back to Margaret River, worked another harvest down there. Loved it again. It was so great. At the end of that harvest, I was like, okay, I want to work a double harvest. I want to work like Israel and Germany. That was my plan. I was like, I can go to Israel, I can work a harvest down there, and then I can go to Germany and work a harvest. Like, I don't know why I thought that was what I wanted to do, but that seemed like the reasonable thing. And Tomo, again, this guy, he knew everyone. He's like, all right, well, if you want to work in Israel, I know a guy named Michael Avery. He's the winemaker at Yard Inn, Golan Heights Winery. Give him a call. Called him up, and he's like, yep, cool, we're kosher, you're not Jewish, you don't observe the Shabbat, you can't touch anything, but we have a research winemaker job open every harvest. And they're a big winery. If you're into kosher wines at all, Yard Inn's like probably the be-all end-all of kosher wines. I'm sure a lot of people would argue with that, but I'd stand by that. So yeah, man, ended up working at Yard Inn in 2010. Got over there by the end of July, and sparkling harvest had just started, and that was fun. Lived at Kibbutz Makkah 9, right outside of Rosh Pina. That was a fun experience. I think they paid me $1,000 a month in U.S. dollars, cash, and gave me a car and paid for my house. So it was great. And I had a gas card, so I could drive all over Israel. And if you're working in the Israeli wine industry, almost all of the Jewish holidays are during harvest. So you get all those off, which was a trip, and you get 1 day a week off. So, man, that was fun. That was really fun.
What do you do as a research winemaker if you can't touch anything?
So they have like a little tiny, they call it their micro winery. It's maybe like 400 or 500 square feet. A little tiny distimmer, a lot of carboys, and they just kind of come up with all these sort of harvest, experiments throughout the year that they want to do. Is it a yeast trial? Is it a nutrient trial? Is there something that you want to do? Is it a picking trial? And so I was managing, probably 20 different trials. And then, I'd already worked in the industry long enough to where they trusted me to like write work orders and stuff and check all the fermentations every morning. So I'd get there at 4 in the morning. I'd meet up with one of the cellar workers who made sure that I didn't touch anything. And he'd go open up all the tanks for me and smell all the tanks, taste the wines with the winemakers every morning. So it was an incredible experience. You got to taste so many wines, and then write some work orders and go do some research for the afternoon. It was really a cool experience. Learned a lot about sparkling winemaking there. They make great sparkling wine. I'd never made sparkling wine before, so I think that informed a lot about what I do here. And then I think the thing I learned the most in Israel is everyone has a military background in Israel for the most part. All the cellar workers did, all the winemakers did for the most part. And so the place was run like a military operation. Everything was set by a clock and everything was done exactly a certain way, and everything had double checks and triple checks to make sure that no one was going to mess anything up. And I was like, these guys know what they're doing. They know how to run a winery. So, I mean, we're a tiny little winery and I run it like a military operation. But I took a lot from that. And that's how you're efficient and you don't make mistakes. And I think that's, two of the most important things during harvest is we're all tired and we have a lot of chance of making mistakes and you have to be efficient. So that was a great experience. That was really cool. And I got to live in Israel, and Yard Inn and the Golan Heights is the most heavily mined area in the entire world. It was a trip, man. It was a trip. It was so cool. It was so cool. You could go up to some of the top tanks and see Damascus. Like you go to some of those 50,000 liter tanks that are 100 feet tall or so, and like you could see so much of Syria and so much of Israel, and wow, it was crazy. Yeah, and that was right before the Arab Spring, which got to do a lot of traveling in Jordan, the Sinai Peninsula, Palestine, which I don't know if I could have done afterward. Palestine probably still, but Sinai Peninsula is not really open still. At least they tell you not to go there still. So. Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, then went back to Margaret River again because it was so amazing. My wife was traveling. My future wife was traveling with me at the time, so went back to Margaret River together. Worked another harvest. She worked at Stella Bella, which was making great wines, and at that point I lived out of backpack for about 3 years. She'd lived out of the backpack for over 2, I think, and we were like, we need a real job. We need to be adults or something. So we started looking for a real job, and we were like, okay, where are we gonna live? She's from Sonoma County, I'm from Idaho. The Willamette Valley was like, that's halfway in between both. We both really liked it here, and we're like, let's move to the Willamette Valley. But that was 2011, and I don't know if you remember 2011. We got here about the 4th of July, and like the vines weren't even to the first wire yet, you know, and there was no flowering even. Like, they weren't ready. Like, it was like, I remember walking vineyards with some winemakers in 2011 and going, Claire, they're not going to have a harvest this year. Let's go to California, because like this is not looking very good for job security if we try to get a job up here. And you know, it was a miracle harvest. Everyone pulled it out, and somehow, you know, they didn't get frost until November, and I still can't believe that harvest happened. But at that point, we went back to Sonoma County and was doing some interviews. My wife got a job at Ferrari Carano as kind of a vit tech. And I got a harvest enologist job at La Crema, which, you know, it was kind of temporary at the time, but they kind of said, you know, if you work out, the economy's getting better, we need to be hiring some people back, and that worked out. So I was at La Crema for a bit, and about a year later we started looking at, we being the Jackson family, wine family, in ownership, started looking at some of the vineyards up here that were for sale through PPV and CalPERS projects. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I've explained, I kind of knew the area already. I knew some of the winemakers up here already. We were, you know, flying winemakers from Sonoma County up here to call picks and stuff, and I knew the vineyards that the Zena Crown Gran Moraine vineyards that we ended up buying. So, you know, I was like, hey, you guys should send me up there, and because I want to make the wine up there. We've been wanting to move to Oregon anyway. You know, it took some time to convince them. I think they were like, yeah, Shane, I was like 28 at the time, and I'd only worked for them for like a year. It's like, yeah, we'll let you run a whole state, sure. But evidently they couldn't find anyone better, so they let me do it. Worked out pretty well. So yeah, I've been here since I think it was Bastille Day. We were partying in Sonoma County. I had thrown a big Bastille Day party, and I got a call from the GM at La Crema, and she's like, you know, some of the executives are going to ask you if you want to move to Oregon tomorrow, just so you're aware. I was like, awesome. And like a week later, we had found a house up here, and yeah, we were moved up within like 3 weeks. So it worked out pretty well.
So, what was your initial charge? What were you asked to do once you moved to Oregon? Yeah,
so, you know, in 2013, when I got up here, we were just closing on what's now the Gran Moraine winery. It was owned by Laurent Montague, and it was the Selena winery at that point. We're just closing on the facility. Laurent, it worked out really well for everyone. He didn't really need the facility anymore. He'd built, you know, the Northwest Wine Company for a production facility. And so we're just closing on this. We'd already had the vineyards, but we didn't have any farmers yet. Ken Kupperman, who's still farming them, was farming them, but he was farming them under Atlas. And you know, my kind of job was to work with Ken and get in all the estate fruit that we needed to get in. We were making wine at 12th and Maple. And then we made wine here. This is about a 200, well, at the time it was 250 ton facility. We've expanded it a little bit to be more like a 350 ton facility. We made 100 tons of Pinot Noir here, that vintage, and probably about 400-ish tons, if I remember right, over at 12th and Maple. The only brand that really existed for Jackson family at that point up here was the La Crema Willamette Valley label. But we were working on starting this Gran Moraine label, and we had the idea of starting the Zena Crown label as well. So this was always kind of the idea of being the home of Gran Moraine. We were thinking we were going to build a winery down on Zena Crown, but it didn't really make as much sense at the time as what we first thought it was going to. So yeah, you know, I was basically calling all the picks, working with Ken, working with some of our other growers. We were buying some fruit at that point as well, and then you know, working with the crew that managed this winery as well as the crew at 12th and Maple. So that was a big job that first year. Eugenia Keegan, our now GM, she was consulting for us. She wasn't a full-time hire yet because she was still working with the Four Graces as well. So yeah, it was just me. It was just me as the Jackson family employee up here. And I think that, you know, I think me having institutional knowledge of Jackson family and the company in California and knowing up here, I think that was what ultimately led them to choose me to do that, because I could kind of put one foot in both places. And it was a hard harvest. I mean, you know, it was looking like it was really great until the end of September, and we'd just picked like 2 or 3 picks, and then it really started raining, you know. And I wondered what I got myself into, because I think it rained almost 10 inches that harvest, you know. But it ended up okay. The wines were good. The 13s are drinking great, so it ended up okay.
You've worked in a lot. I mean, even by winemaker standards, you work in a lot of places, by then a lot of different regions. Tell me what your initial thoughts were on Oregon and how it compared to some of the places you've been on the Oregon wine industry, I guess.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, in terms of Pinot Noir winemaking, it's definitely, I think it's more of a challenge than where I'd worked in Sonoma County in a lot of ways, and with the climate and all that. We're more on the margin, which, you know, places that are on the margin are those places that make the best of those varietals. So I think that's a positive for us. In terms of the culture, you know, it's Northwest. I grew up in the Northwest, so the Northwest culture is real here. The food and just how we interact with people. I mean, you can never tell if you're dressed up to go to a nice dinner or if you're just going to go for a hike for the day. You're wearing the same thing, you know. Actually, one of my resolutions when I moved here was to never wear a collar again, so t-shirts only.
How's that going?
It's gone great. I don't think I've had a collar on for like 5 or 6 years.
It's good to have you back in the Northwest.
Yeah, it's good to be here. You know, and then it kind of reminded me of Margaret River, the wine industry itself. You know, we're both about the same age. We're both just over 50 years old now. Then there's been just kind of a few generations of people, and the older generations always wanted to help the younger generation. We're both kind of isolated and out there in terms of geography. So it's kind of felt like that in some ways. There's this really great collegial spirit. You hear it over and over, but it's true. I mean, people wouldn't say it if it wasn't true. And that's been the fun part. And everyone wanted to get to know, you know, who Shane Moore was whenever I moved here. And there was some confusion because there's another Shane Moore that lives in McMinnville that is a Vineyard manager. So everyone's like, and he has a red beard. So
it confused me too, I'll tell you. So
yeah, it's still, you know, you go to get your season pass at a Bachelor or Hoodoo, I think it was Hoodoo, and they're like, you've already got your season pass, Shane. I'm like, no man, believe me, there's the other Shane Moore. Just believe me. So no, you know, I think it's an amazing place to make wine and to have friends in the industry. I really do. I mean, yeah, I love it here.
What was the reaction for you? I mean, obviously there was a lot of concern about Jackson family coming to Oregon. I'm curious how you were received by people when you were coming, like, with the Jackson family flag.
Yeah, you know, I think, well, one, Jackson family did a really good job of, like, wanting to integrate with the community and do the right things. You know, we came out and really supported some of the great causes that the wine industry is behind straight away, like Salud, and you know, we didn't want to come out here and make, I think a lot of the reservation of Jackson family coming into the Willamette Valley is, oh, they're going to make a $12 Pinot Noir and ruin the brand of the Willamette Valley. Well, if anyone knows, you know, the ownership of our company, that is the exact opposite of what we strive to do. So I think everyone was like really relieved whenever they saw the Gran Moraine label and like the price point, and then tasted the wines that we were putting out. So I think there was that, and then, you know, myself, I think, and well, hiring Eugenia was a big deal because she knows everyone, of course. She's been a stalwart of the industry for a better part of a decade. So she really helped navigate those waters. And then, you know, I grew up here, so it wasn't like they were sending someone from Sonoma County who didn't know about the Northwest or had no idea, or just wanted to come up here and say, well, this is the way we do things in California, you country bumpkins. So I think that was a positive as well. So, you know, I think there was some reservations, but it was really fun. And then my wife, she came, you know, with us as well. She quit her job. She was working full-time for as an assistant winemaker at a small winery called Everett Ridge, and she got a job at Belpont for harvest, just to work harvest. And like, that was really fun because I got to know the Belpont crew really well, and a lot of the smaller wineries around, and made a lot of lifelong friends that harvest.
So obviously you mentioned you were brought up here to kind of develop this, and obviously it's developed very nicely. So tell me about kind of what the goal was for Gran Moraine, and sort of your role in helping it become what it is now.
Yeah, you know, whenever we started the Gran Moraine brand and the Zena Crown brand, we wanted them to be estate vineyard focused. A lot of what Jackson family does is, you know, they're almost like a real estate company in some ways. They buy these incredible vineyards and properties, and a lot of the time we try to tie a brand to those vineyards that helps elevate the brand, the vineyard, and it helps, you know, develop I guess value in those assets. So sort of the goal was to create like a world-class winery around that vineyard, kind of like what Shea has done, but do it differently. And we wanted to keep the Gran Moraine and Zena Crown names because, you know, there was already like Beau Ferrer doing a single vineyard Gran Moraine and a Zena Crown, Penarash doing a single vineyard Zena Crown. So there was a lot of appeal in keeping those names, and a lot of I guess awareness of the vineyards and the brand already. So with that, you know, what I wanted to do was take this brand and make more of like I wanted to make a style that maybe Jackson family didn't necessarily have in their portfolio, not just Willamette Valley, not just Yamhill Carlton, but something that's maybe, I mean, if you see the package, and it's very almost old world, it's very classy, it's elegant, it's subtle, and that's what I wanted to do with the wines, was create something maybe a little bit more subtle, a little bit more sort of sophisticated and kind of quiet. And those are the wines that I like to drink. Those wines that are like a good friend that, you know, you can have a conversation with, instead of wines that are like, you know, big bold wines that just want to talk at you, kind of like what I'm doing right now. So.
We're making you do that, though. It's okay. You're being forced. So tell me about making those kinds of wines. Obviously, you had made wine a lot of different places. You made wine a lot of different kind of styles. Tell me about finding that subtle style that fit with the place you were making wine.
You know, I think we get a lot of leeway in Oregon because of the culture that's been created here through the years, with the connections to Burgundy, both with the people. I mean, there's a lot of people that make wine here from Burgundy and from France, but with the climate as well. And so, you know, if I was trying to make, like, let's take our Chardonnay, for example, it's, you know, very low alcohol, very high acid, more sort of saline and mineral driven than fruit driven. If I tried to do that in California, people would think, it's like, what is this? It would not really fit with what has happened in the past there, and what people think about whenever they think about wines from a particular region. So, you know, I'm able to make wines that are more the way that I want to make, but I'm allowed to, partly because of the culture, partly because of people understand them if they're coming from here. So that's been nice. I haven't had to fight that, you know. And then Pinot Noir, kind of the same way, you know, kind of the same idea is we're able to make a little less extracted, more elegant style, and that's to be expected from Oregon. So, you know, and it's both the culture and the climate that give us that. So thank you, all those that came before me.
Has your role shifted since you started?
Yeah. You know, whenever I was first here, I was helping kind of do all things with Oregon, with La Crema, with, you know, just trying to start a whole new infrastructure of a wine company in Oregon. And, you know, 2016 into 17, we started building a winery in McMinnville, we being Jack's family, and at that point I'd hired another winemaker, Sam Paleman, who's a great winemaker, and I was like, I don't want to run a big winery. I like this little winery. I like the two small brands that we're doing. This is what I'm really into. So I kind of spun off a lot of that to her, and she manages that winery. She manages the La Crema brand winemaking up here. So I have nothing to do with it anymore. And I mean, it's great. I get to focus on the little minutia of the more artistic side of just the little things here. So that's what I like, and that's what I really wanted to do in the first place. So yeah, in some ways my roles shrank, which has been great for me in terms of you know, really focusing on wine quality. And I think the wine show, it's every year I think we're getting better, and I think everyone should do that. But I think starting in about 2017, when I was able to really focus on these wines exclusively, I think is whenever we really took that bar up another level.
Tell me about getting to know the site. Tell me about getting to know Gran Moraine, getting to know Zena Crown. How long does it take you to understand your vineyard, understand what you're going to get each year? Yeah,
you know, this is the longest I think I've ever worked with, you know, a site. This will be my 7th harvest or 8th harvest, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 8th this year, whoa. With the same blocks, you know, and the same grower, and yeah, same vineyards, and it's great. It's really fun to get to know like each block, and it makes your life just so much easier and so much better. Like, I know what's going to flower first. I can go check on that and be like, okay, you know, one of my earliest blocks on Gran Moraine, I would say flowered about June 9th, and I know like in the last 7 years I've picked it about 85 to 95 days post flowering. So I was there on June 9th. I was like, yep, it's flowering today. All right, I'm gonna be picking this within these 5 days. I would almost guarantee you that, you know. So knowing the site and knowing that and knowing what to expect, you know, wow, so cool. You know, it's like, you know, being married in some ways, or, you know, getting to really know someone and living with someone for a long time. It's just like, you know, they're little things, you know, like after a nap that you probably shouldn't bother them for 20 minutes. Like, that's kind of how
it's a hard one to learn,
you know. Yeah, you know, it's like, oh yeah, I know that the top of this block here, this vineyard here, it's ugly. It's like the soils are really thin, and like it never makes it the top wire, and I know not to be worried about it because it still makes some of the best wine in my whole winery every single year, despite it being like a pretty feral looking block. So that's pretty cool. That's been really fun. I love that. Yeah, it's just, you know, you want to make sure you're not getting complacent, I guess, with getting to know these things. I don't know. that's why you just got to keep it fun and interesting, do different things every year, try your best. But yeah, getting to know the blocks has been great. It's been really fun. It's been great.
Is there anything unique about Oregon from in terms of grape growing? Are there any unique disease pressures, or is there anything that you've had to learn here or deal with that you hadn't dealt with before?
Oh man, I mean, everywhere has its kind of things. You know, there's a lot of that here. You know, it's whenever I talk to some of my colleagues in other wine regions, you know, and I talk about being a 300-ton winery, they're like, wow, that must be so like easy. And it's like, well, we still have 120 fermentations going, you know. Everything's on a different scale. Like all of our blocks are, you know, in California, you can go to Pinot Noir blocks that are set up as 20-ton, mostly 20-ton, 20, 40-ton, to be like, all right, this block is going to be 2 truckloads. Whereas here, it's like, they're set up to where they're like, no one has tanks bigger than 5 tons. So you plant your blocks to be no more than 5 tons, you know? Mm-hmm. So there's things like that that are interesting and in scale. And then, yeah, there's a lot of different things. It's warmer at night here than I thought it would be, which is interesting. So, you know, we don't have as much acid as what, particularly in Pinot, as what you would anticipate it being this far north, this close to the ocean, which I found really intriguing when I first started making wine here. And most people, I mean, it's not something we talk about as a wine industry that much. Most people don't talk about it. So it wasn't something I knew anecdotally either. And then the humidity was really interesting here. Like, summers can be, when it's hot, it can get humid here. I mean, it's that amount of rain, but like, I mean, I grew up in Idaho, like, it can be 95 degrees and there's no humidity there, and it's really nice to be outside. Here at 95, it just is brutal, you know, which, you know, the humidity can cause some more disease pressure than what you would anticipate as well. So little things like that, little interesting climatic things. And then how diverse it is too climatically. I mean, who knew that? And you can be told that the Willamette Hills is windy, but until you're down there in July in the afternoon and at 4:30 the wind really rips up and it cools down for 10 degrees, you don't really know, mm-hmm. you know. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's been kind of fun.
So what are the biggest differences you've seen in Oregon since you got here? You've been here, like I said, this is your eighth harvest here. So what's changed in the Oregon wine industry from when you started to now?
Yeah, there's been a lot of stuff. I think some of the biggest changes in the wine industry haven't really had to do with production, but having more to do with the world recognizing Oregon as like a really top quality wine region. You know, it seems like the amount of recognition the Willamette Valley has gotten in the last 5 or 6 years has been incredible. You know, people have really gotten behind how great the wines are and what we're doing here. So that's been really fun to watch. That's been really fun to watch. I think that's been the main difference. You know, there's of course more new vineyards. There's of course new people from different regions coming in, but I think that's happened all along. That's just, you know, that's something that's going to happen no matter what. It's been really cool to see people really get behind the wines here. The Willamette Valley wine auction, I think, has really helped. I think, you know, just the marketing behind of what's happening here is great. It's been fun. It's been fun to be kind of a part of that rising tide. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about a couple of one thing that occurs to me. You were brought up here to kind of start this kind of elite brand for Jackson family. They're kind of one of their first entrees into Oregon, and you're here right as Oregon is kind of taking off in terms of recognition, as you mentioned. I'm curious about if you felt any pressure Do you feel any pressure doing those kinds of, having that kind of responsibility, that kind of time, working for a place like Jackson Family?
I mean, yeah, of course. It's, I'm afraid of my own shadow, I think, and I sleep poorly often thinking about weird little things about wine. Of course, and I think all winemakers feel it though. We all have to strive to, like, it's kind of uniquely American, I guess, too, though. I mean, we strive to be the best, right? Often in America, it's like we're going to be the best winemaker or the best whatever you do, and I find that a little bit humorous, but I probably have bought into it a little bit too much too. But yeah, no, it's real. You know, we work really hard to make sure that we're making the best wines we possibly can, and making sure that people know about it. And you know, it's not really so much about scores and stuff like that, but you know, having the New York Times write you up, or having like Jancis Robinson last year say that you know, the Gran Moraine Chard was her wine of the year for Wine Speed. Or not Jancis, sorry, Karen McNeil. I apologize, Jancis and Karen. That's exciting, you know. That's pretty cool. I never would have really thought that would happen. So that's the fun part, right? That's that other side of the coin. Yes, it is stressful, but man, it's pretty cool to see that people recognize what you're doing as well. That's great.
So obviously we're talking to you in July of 2020. We're in the midst of the COVID pandemic still. I'm curious about how it has affected your work and your work here at Gran Moraine, and sort of your work in general. How has it affected, and has it changed your kind of outlook on the future at all? Yeah,
wow. This is, the great pause is pretty wild, you know. I have a 3-year-old at home, so childcare was fun. Trying to manage a winery and keep everyone safe whenever, you know, at the start we knew nothing about how it spread at all even. That was scary. It's still scary. You know, we're getting in our interns from all over the United States, and they're all in their 20s. And I mean, when I was an intern, I liked to party, and I just hope that they are responsible. But I don't think they will be. So that's scary too, you know. It's been kind of a trip. I've definitely done a lot more cellar work than I had in the last couple of years, because I haven't been able to speak, you know, we're doing Zoom, but man, I got serious screen fatigue. I think everyone did. And so, you know, we haven't been able to talk to people. I normally travel. I'm normally on the road 2 to 3 months a year, meeting with somms and wine writers and stuff like that, and that completely got canceled, you know. But not only that, but a lot of the time we have restaurants here and somms here and writers, and it's kind of a big, you know, it's talking about wine all the time, and this is probably the most I've talked in, God, months. I did have 2 winemakers come by yesterday from Santa Barbara, and that was the first time I'd actually like sat down with a winemaker and tasted wine. We sat at 3 very distant tables apart from one another. It's the most wine talk I've had with another winemaker in ages, you know. Felt good, felt really good. So, you know, that's been kind of a trip. Is, you know, Steamboat got canceled this year, which is the winemakers sort of where we all get together and talk about wine for a few days. Everything did, every course, but that's been interesting and hard. It's been hard trying to keep care of a kid and work in the cellar. It's been hard selling wine, you know, like 80% of our wine sales for the most part were to restaurants. Whenever all the restaurants are closed, where are you selling your wine? You know, so that's interesting too. Hopefully we, you know, get our restaurants back. We have to get our restaurants back. I think the industry needs that really bad. We rely on them. I mean, I know that the Willamette Valley auction, a lot of that this year is going toward restaurants in one way or another, which that's important. I think it's, you know, for us as a wine industry, I think we're going to start realizing maybe more how we are connected so much to, and we already knew it, but it was like, I think it's more palpable now, how interdependent we are with restaurants and with just people traveling and stuff like that. You know, we're still shipping wine to people, and that's been great. The direct shipping's been really good, actually, out of the front door here. But you know, I don't know. I was downtown. They closed 3rd Street down for the Dine Out in McMinnville. I was walking, getting ice cream with my kid, and I saw someone open a bottle of wine and serve it, and it like hit me hard, man. That was the first time I'd seen that since March. Like, wow. And like, that used to be like every day, you know? So, I don't know. That's tough. It's pretty weird to be nostalgic about seeing someone open a bottle of wine, but.
And then when they serve it, it doesn't feel the same anymore either, because it's like you have to stand apart or use a carafe or pour, and you know. Yeah. Even then, it's not quite the same.
No. But yeah, it was just a trip to see someone open a bottle of wine at a table, man. Even though they were wearing a mask. I mean, it wasn't at my table. I can't wait, but I don't think I'm there personally yet. I haven't ate out yet. So, yeah.
What about as you look ahead? You mentioned harvest. Obviously, harvest coming up. What is going to be different about this year's harvest?
A lot, you know. My crew, like we've built a makeshift kitchen and break area outside. You know, everyone's always 6 feet apart at least. It's going to be different. Like, you know, you don't see people's smiles. You can see it in their eyes, but it's different. It's going to be hard to harvest is one of those really fun times that you get to know a small group of people. It's like going off to camp or something like that, and you get really tight with these people. And I don't think that that's going to be really there this year. You know, we might still have a beer in the parking lot before going home, but you know, it won't be like, okay, let's all go out for dinner together now and all that. So it's going to feel more like work. Which, you know, it's hard. Harvest is hard. So you got to, like, we always are really into fun and trying to make it like, yes, it's hard work, but let's enjoy this and really like develop a community. You know, I have people all over the world that have worked for me and that I've worked with that, like, I feel like I have this extended community. It's going to be harder to maintain that this year, I think. So,
might be your first real job.
Dude, I know. That could be true. It actually does make it feel more like a job. That's sad.
sorry to bring it down. So what about as you look ahead? What if you look ahead for Oregon wine in general? What does the pandemic change about Oregon wine, and what is it going to look like over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, God, I wish. I mean, predicting the future is always funny, right? You can say whatever you want, but I don't know. I honestly really don't know. I think it's going to change our sales channels in some way. I think it's got to. I think we're going to have to focus more on direct to consumer, on communicating more directly with the people that are buying our wines, or not necessarily the people that are buying our wines, but the people who are drinking our wines. I think that's going to be more and more important. And I think it was already, but this has really pushed us to where we have to do that now. That's good. We want people to be more connected with what we're doing with the stewardship of the land and with agriculture in general. I think people have a yearning to do that. So it could be a good thing. I hope it's a good thing. It's going to definitely require more legwork and more outreach. I don't know what else, you know. I mean, I hope we all get to keep doing what we're doing, and I think we will, but I hope that this doesn't just consolidate, you know, the wine industry to those 120 grocery store brands, you know. That's what I hope. That's a fear of mine. I hope that doesn't happen. It won't entirely, but this has been really hard on small producers. So, yeah.
What about as you look ahead for yourself and for the Gran Moraine and Zenith Crown Jackson Family project here in Oregon? What do you see for yourself looking ahead?
You know, one of my favorite people in the wine industry is Steve at Christome. He's been there since '92, you know, and like for them, it's not about like making more wine or anything. It's just making better wine every year and just living it and doing the best you can. And that's what I want to do. That's always what I wanted to do. I've never necessarily wanted to like make the biggest brand in the world or anything like that. It's like I want to just do what we're doing really well and just keep doing it. It's what I love doing. Every year is different, you know. So that's the fun in that. And we only get, well, this year would be my 21st harvest, but as I kind of talked, I'd worked back and forth a lot. What am I going to get? Maybe 50 harvests in my life? I don't know. It's not a lot. That's not a lot to really like hone in on something if you only get to do something 50 times and every time it's a little bit different. So it keeps it interesting. So yeah, hopefully we just keep making better wine. Let's see.
You had mentioned one of the things that made it fun and interesting for you was experimenting and trying new and interesting things. Is there anything on the horizon that you're excited to try?
You know, yeah, there's so much. I've been experimenting with different things every single year, and you know, I think that within my lifetime, probably within the next 10 years, I'm assuming there's going to be ingredient labeling on wine. And one of my goals in life has been like, I want to take grapes and put them in a tank and then in a barrel and have great wine. And how do you do that? And so I've been experimenting more and more with minimal interventions or no interventions at all. That's something I'm really into right now. That's been kind of the last 3 years that I've been working on that. I guess my goal is once ingredient labeling comes along for my wine to say grapes and some sulfur, you know, and maybe no sulfur. The sparkling wines we're making right now, we're adding a tiny bit of sulfur at the end, but it's still such a small amount that it would be considered sulfur free in terms of regulatory, I guess in America, our regulations. So that's kind of what I'm into right now, I guess. That's been fun. It's been fun. It's a challenge, right? To make world-class wines that are like not just super nerdy, you know, that anyone can enjoy, but with techniques that were used at the dawn of civilization. So that's my challenge.
No big deal. You got this. Simple.
It's funny. It is simple, but then it isn't.
So what advice would you have, or what would your words of wisdom be to someone who wanted to join the Oregon wine industry?
I mean, it just depends on what you're wanting to get into, I guess. Is go taste wine and get to know people. It's all about who you know, right? And you're not going to be thought about for that one position that you might be qualified for or really want if the person who has it doesn't know you. Most of these jobs aren't advertised, you know. And prepare to get your hands dirty for a long time, you know. I tell all my interns, it's like you got to work 10 harvests before you probably even expect to have a full-time job somewhere, you know. That's the reality of it. The thing is, like, again, going back to some music references, I mean, Pink's really into wine, right? How many musicians or actors, I guess, are really into wine? Like when you're a kid, you think like the coolest thing in the world would be to be a rock star, and then the rock stars, to them, the coolest thing in the world is to own a winery or to be a winemaker. A lot of the time it's like, okay, so if rock stars want your job, it's going to be pretty hard.
Nice.
You know, just take it that far. It's going to be hard to get it. So you got to work hard, man, and know the right people and be in the right place at the right time. A lot of it's luck. Taste a lot. That's fun.
Awesome. With all the questions I have for you, I keep talking to you all day, but we got to stop at some point. So, anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that we should have covered?
Oh man, I don't know. No.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your time. I'm glad I gave you a chance to talk wine a little bit today, and appreciate your time, appreciate your stories, and all your thoughts here today. And we'll let you off the hook.
Thanks.